The moment my son-in-law stepped away from the table to take a phone call, the woman in the next booth leaned over and pressed a folded $20 bill into my hand. "Get out now," she whispered. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her lips barely moving. "While he's gone, go to the bathroom and don't come back, please. I'm begging you." I was 63 years old, sitting in a chain restaurant on a Tuesday afternoon, and a stranger was telling me to run. I want to back up, because none of this makes sense without what came before. My daughter, my only child, my Melissa, had been married to her husband for 11 months when he started making what he called practical arrangements. That's what he called it. Practical. He had a way of wrapping everything in language that sounded reasonable until you were alone in the dark trying to figure out how the floor had fallen out from under you. His name was Preston. Preston Aldridge. He came into Melissa's life when she was 37 and lonely and still grieving the father she'd lost 2 years before. My husband Arthur had died of a heart attack on a Saturday morning in April, and Melissa had taken it harder than she let on. She smiled at the funeral. She held my hand. She drove me home and made me soup, but something in her had gone very quiet after that, and I noticed it even if she didn't. Preston noticed it too. That's what I understand now. He found her through a mutual friend, charming and patient and full of the kind of attention that feels like sunlight after a long winter. He remembered her coffee order. He texted her good morning every single day for 3 months before he asked her to dinner. He brought her lilac because she'd mentioned once that her father used to plant it along the fence every spring. He listened. Lord, did he listen? I liked him. That's the part that still sits sideways in my chest. I sat across from that man at Thanksgiving and I liked him. He helped me with my coat. He asked about Arthur like he genuinely wanted to know. He touched Melissa's hand across the table in a way that made something in me unclench just slightly. She seemed happy. She hadn't seemed happy in a long time. They got married in May. Small ceremony, backyard, white folding chairs under a rented canopy. Melissa wore her grandmother's pearl earrings. I cried in the good way. By Christmas, things had started to shift. Nothing dramatic, nothing you could point to and say, there is the moment everything changed. It was more like a slow dimming, the way daylight shortens in October. You don't notice each day individually. You just look up one morning and realize it got dark while you weren't paying attention. Preston started handling their finances. He said Melissa found it stressful and he was good with numbers, and that was true. She did find it stressful, so I didn't think twice. He moved them into a new apartment. Nicer, he said. A fresh start. He suggested Melissa cut back her hours at work. She'd been a dental hygienist for 12 years. Good at it. Steady income. But Preston said she deserved a break, and honestly, why not? He made good money managing properties for a company that owned commercial real estate all over the Tri-County area. My calls with Melissa got shorter. She always sounded fine. A little tired, maybe. A little careful. I told myself I was imagining things. Then in January, Preston called me, not Melissa, him, and suggested the 3 of us have lunch. There was something he wanted to discuss with me. A practical arrangement, he said. We met at the Cracker Barrel off Route 9, which should have told me something. Preston was the kind of man who knew exactly which setting made a person feel at ease and which made them feel off balance. A chain restaurant near a highway is the kind of place where everything feels a little temporary, a little unimportant. Hard to make a scene at a Cracker Barrel. Melissa was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She gave me a smile that didn't quite reach. Preston stood up when he saw me, pumped my hand, told me I looked wonderful, ordered for all 3 of us before I'd finished sitting down. He waited until the food arrived to start talking. He said he'd been thinking about my situation. The house Arthur and I had shared for 31 years, the one I still lived in alone, the one with the garden Arthur kept, and the back porch where Melissa grew up doing her homework. 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a neighborhood that had gotten considerably more valuable over the last decade. Preston said he'd had it assessed. Informally, he was quick to add, just a ballpark. He slid a folded piece of paper across the table to me without making a show of it, the way a man slides a card to a waiter. Just a number there, a big one. The market's not going to stay like this forever, he said, cutting into his chicken. And the upkeep on a house that size, for one person, it's a lot of money every year that you're just letting walk out the door. Heating that whole place alone, the property taxes. He was right about some of it. That's what I keep coming back to. He was right enough about enough things that I stayed sitting there, listening, nodding slowly, instead of doing what I should have done, which was put down my fork and say, "What exactly are you suggesting?" What he was suggesting was that I sell the house and move into a mother-in-law suite they would have built onto a property he wanted to buy. I would contribute the proceeds from my house sale, a large portion of them, toward the down payment. In exchange, I would live there, rent-free, cared for, close to Melissa. He called it pooling resources. He called it smart. Melissa looked at her food through most of this. When I glanced at her, she gave me a small, tight smile that I couldn't read. I said I'd think about it. That was when the woman in the next booth leaned over with the $20 bill. I hadn't noticed her before. She was in her mid-50s, I'd say, with short silver hair and the kind of face that had been through something. She wore a beige cardigan, and she'd been sitting alone with a glass of iced tea the whole time we'd been there. I don't know how long she'd been listening. She was close enough. "Go to the bathroom," she said again, barely above a murmur. "Tell them you don't feel well. Get out before you sign anything." I looked at her for probably 3 full seconds. Then I turned back to my plate and I said, "Will you excuse me a moment? I need to use the ladies' room." I stood up before Preston could respond, and I walked toward the back of the restaurant. I heard his chair scrape behind me almost immediately. The women's restroom had one stall, one sink, a hand dryer that rattled when it ran. I locked the door and stood with my back against it, and my heart was going in a way it hadn't since the night they called me about Arthur. I pulled out my phone. My hands were doing something I didn't want them to do. I opened my texts and found Melissa's name, and I typed, "Come to the bathroom. Don't tell him." I stood there for what felt like forever. The door handle jiggled once. "Mom?" It wasn't Melissa's voice. It was Preston's, modulated down to something that sounded like concern. "You all right in there? You were looking a little pale." "I'm fine," I said. "Just a minute." Silence on the other side, then footsteps. My phone buzzed. "Melissa, what's wrong?" "Me. Just come, please." 40 seconds later, a soft knock, a different knock. I opened the door just wide enough. She slipped in and I shut it again. "Mom, what?" "Has he had you sign anything?" I asked. "About the house, about my house, or any other property? Has he shown you paperwork?" She went still in a way that answered the question before she opened her mouth. "Melissa, it's just a pre-approval thing," she said, "for the mortgage on the new house. He said we needed to show a combined asset picture. Your house is technically part of our households." "It is not part of your household. It's mine, Arthur's and mine." I kept my voice low with some effort. "Have you signed anything with my name on it?" She looked at the floor. He said it was standard, just a preliminary form. I felt the whole room tilt sideways. "What kind of form, sweetheart? What did it say?" "I don't know, Mom. He handled it. He said it was just to show the lender what assets were in the family picture. It didn't mean." "Where is he now?" She looked up. "I don't know. He got up after you did." Something moved through me then. Not panic. Something older than panic. Something that's been keeping women alive for centuries when the situation stops making sense in a way they can explain to other people. "We're leaving," I said. "Mom! Mom!" "We are leaving right now, not through the dining room. Is there a side door?" She stared at me. "There's an exit by the restrooms, but our coats—" "Leave them." Preston is going to—" "I know what Preston is going to do," I said. "That's why we're leaving." We went out the side door into the parking lot. February cold hit us like a wall. Melissa wrapped her arms around herself, and I clicked my key fob until I found my Civic, and we got in, and I locked the doors and sat there for a moment, just breathing. "You're scaring me," Melissa said. "Good," I said. "You should be scared. I should have been scared 3 months ago." I drove us to my house, Arthur's house, our house. I made coffee and we sat at the kitchen table where Melissa had done her homework for years, and I told her what the woman in the restaurant had said, and I watched my daughter's face do something complicated and painful. "She's probably just some busybody who misheard the conversation," Melissa said, but she said it without conviction. "Then why did Preston follow me to the bathroom?" I said. She didn't have an answer for that. We talked for 2 hours. She cried once, a short, controlled cry that broke my heart because she looked like she was trying to do it quietly so I wouldn't notice. By the end of it, she'd called her friend who worked at a title company just to ask, casually, what it would mean if someone's name had been attached to a preliminary mortgage document without that person's explicit written consent. Her friend said, "That's not how that works. That's not legal. Who told you it was standard?" Melissa hung up and sat with her phone in her hands for a long moment. "I need you to tell me everything," she said quietly. "From the beginning. Every gut feeling you had that you talked yourself out of." So I did. Preston called 14 times that evening. Melissa didn't answer. At 9:30 he sent a text saying he'd been worried sick and the restaurant manager had been rude to him, and could she please just let him know she was safe. At 10 o'clock he sent another one saying he'd stopped by her mother's house, my house, and no one had answered, which meant either I wasn't home or I was deliberately keeping his wife from him and he just wanted to understand what was happening. At 10:15 I called the non-emergency line for the county sheriff's office. The deputy who came was a woman named Officer Tate, young, with a calm professional manner that I found steadying. I told her what I knew and what I suspected. She took notes. She told me that the name on a mortgage document without that person's knowledge or signed consent was a serious matter, and she gave me the number for the county district attorney's fraud division. She also told me to get a real estate attorney first thing in the morning. I didn't sleep. In the morning, while Melissa was still asleep in her old bedroom under the quilt her grandmother had made, I found the woman from the restaurant. I know that sounds improbable, but her face had stayed with me all night and I'm not so old that I've forgotten how to use the internet. Silver hair, beige cardigan, alone at a Cracker Barrel on a Tuesday at noon on Route 9. I posted in the local community Facebook group, carefully without naming names, saying I'd been at that restaurant around noon on Tuesday, and a woman had done me a kindness and I wanted to thank her. Would she reach out? She did, that afternoon. Her name was Dorothy Kimball. She was 56, a retired schoolteacher who lived 20 minutes away. We met the next morning at a coffee shop of my choosing, one with windows and people and easy sight lines to the door. She wrapped both hands around her mug, and she said, "I wasn't sure I should say anything. I sat there going back and forth for almost 10 minutes. You never know how people will react." "What made you do it?" I asked. She looked at her coffee. "Because I sat in a booth just like that one 2 years ago. Different restaurant, different man, same conversation." She paused. "My sister, her second husband, he got her to sign over her condo in Clearwater as part of a so-called asset consolidation before they bought a house together. 6 weeks after the closing, he refinanced the condo under only his name. She didn't find out until he served her with divorce papers and she realized she didn't have anywhere to go back to." The air went out of me slowly. "He didn't take everything," Dorothy said. "She got a settlement eventually, but it took 4 years and nearly bankrupted her fighting it. And the whole time, everyone around her, mutual friends, even her own kids at first, thought she was being unreasonable because he was so pleasant. He was always so pleasant. We sat with that for a moment. "How did you know?" I asked. "In the restaurant. How did you know it was the same thing?" "The paper he slid across the table," she said. "Folded, no explanation, just a number. Like he was doing you a favor by even showing you. That's the move. You show the big number and you let greed and flattery do the rest." She looked at me steadily. "And the way your daughter was sitting, I know that posture. That's someone who has already been told what to think and is just waiting to see if you go along with it." I drove home and sat in Arthur's chair in the living room and let myself feel the full weight of what had almost happened. Then I got up and made some calls. The real estate attorney, a sharp woman named Ellen who came recommended by my friend at church, confirmed within 48 hours that Preston had indeed had Melissa sign something attaching my property address to a preliminary lending document as a family asset. It had no legal force because my name wasn't on it and I hadn't consented to it, but Ellen's voice when she told me this was the voice of someone trying to stay professional while explaining that this kind of thing is, in fact, a known pattern. "It's called mortgage fraud when it progresses far enough," she told me. "Usually it doesn't get to that stage because most people either comply or walk away before it becomes prosecutable. But the intent is there." She paused. "How long have they been married?" 11 months, I said. A short silence. "Has he pushed for you to update your estate documents? Name him as a beneficiary anywhere? Suggested you consider putting him or your daughter on the deed as a co-owner, just for practical reasons?" He had, in fact, raised the deed question in December. Casually, over Christmas dinner. I'd changed the subject and he'd let it go and I'd managed to forget about it almost completely. I told Ellen. "I think you should call the district attorney's office," she said, "not to start a fire, just so there's a record." I called. I went in. I sat across from an assistant DA named Mr. Okafor, who was young enough to be my grandson and who listened to everything I said without interrupting. At the end of it, he pulled up something on his computer screen, typed some things, and then sat back in his chair in a way that told me he'd found something. "Mr. Aldridge has been associated with 2 prior real estate transactions in this county," he said carefully. "One involving an elderly woman who subsequently moved to assisted living under contested circumstances. One involving a widow who sold her home 18 months after marriage at a significant loss and relocated out of state." He looked at me over the desk. "We've been building a file." I don't know exactly what I expected to feel in that moment. What I actually felt was a very specific bone-deep exhaustion. The kind that comes not from being tired, but from realizing how long you've been carrying something you didn't know you were carrying. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," he said, "I need you to be patient, and I need your daughter's cooperation." Melissa's cooperation came in pieces. She was not stupid. She had never been stupid. But there is a particular kind of love that makes a person reinterpret everything they see. And she had been doing that for 11 months. Dismantling it was slow, and it was painful. And I sat with her through as much of it as she would let me. The moment that broke it open was when Mr. Okafor's office located the woman who had sold her house and moved out of state. Her name was Rosalind, and she was 68, and she agreed to a video call with the DA's office. Melissa sat in the room with me when we watched her testimony. Rosalind had been a widow. She had a grown son who lived far away. She had met a man through her church who was kind and patient, and who remembered small things about her. She married him 14 months after her husband died. Within a year, she had transferred her home into joint tenancy at his suggestion, which under their state's laws meant that when she refinanced for what he called better rates, his name was effectively controlling the equity. He had begun the process of a quiet sale to an LLC registered in another state before she noticed anything was wrong, and by then her own attorney told her the legal fees to fight it might exceed what she'd recover. She moved to her son's spare room. She was still there. Melissa watched the screen and didn't say anything for a long time after Rosalind signed off. Then she said, "How did I not see it?" "He didn't want you to," I said. "That was the whole job, keeping you not seeing it." She nodded very slowly. Then she picked up her phone and called her husband for the first time in 6 days. She asked him to meet her at Ellen's office the next morning to sort out some confusion about the mortgage documents. She kept her voice calm and slightly apologetic, and she was so convincing that I felt something twist in me watching her, because I realized she had learned how to keep her voice calm and slightly apologetic from 11 months of practice. He came to the meeting. Of course he did. Men like Preston always come to the meeting. They are never more confident than when they're sitting across a table from the women they've underestimated. He walked into Ellen's office with a smile and a leather portfolio and his hand extended, and he stopped when he saw Mr. Okafor's deputy sitting in the corner with a notepad. His face did something very brief and very telling. Ellen laid the documents on the table. The preliminary mortgage submission, the prior transactions, Rosalind's sworn statement, the pattern laid out with the quiet precision of someone who has spent a career turning women's bad instincts about dangerous men into airtight paper. Preston said the word attorney 4 times in the next 90 seconds. He got one, of course he did. But what followed, I was told, was less a legal battle than a controlled unravelling. The LLC he'd used in the prior transaction was connected to a property management company that had 2 other ongoing matters in neighbouring counties. He hadn't invented the scheme himself. That much became clear, but he had participated in it knowingly, systematically, and for long enough that the day's office had what they needed. He was charged. That's public record, so I'll say it plainly. Fraud, conspiracy to commit mortgage fraud, elder financial abuse in connection with Rosalind's case. The trial is pending as I tell you this. His attorney will argue what his attorneys always argue, but the file exists. The women's names are in it, and this time someone is going to have to answer for them. Melissa filed for divorce in March. It was not easy. I won't pretend it was easy. She had loved him, or she had loved who she believed him to be, which in the moment of loving feels exactly the same. Grieving a lie is still grieving. I held her through it the same way she held me when Arthur died, sitting close, not saying too much, letting the hard parts be hard. She's back at work now, full-time. She moved into a rental apartment 3 blocks from mine, and on Sunday mornings she comes over and we have coffee on the back porch, the same porch where she did her homework all those years ago. Last month she planted lilac along the fence, just like her father used to. I think about Dorothy Kimball more than she knows. I sent her flowers eventually after everything settled enough that I could think straight. Tulips, because I didn't know her well enough to know what she liked, and tulips seemed safe and cheerful. She texted me a photo of them in a mason jar on her kitchen windowsill. I think about how close I came, how many women don't have a Dorothy, how many sit in that booth and hear a reasonable number and think, well, he does make a good point about the heating costs. How many sign the form because the man they love brought them their coffee order without being asked and remembered that their father planted lilac every spring? I think about Rosalind in her son's spare room, and I think about what the deputy DA said to me, almost in passing, as I was leaving his office the second time. He said, "Women your age, living alone, recently widowed or divorced, they're targeted specifically, because they're perceived as isolated and because their assets are often the result of a lifetime of work that they don't fully know how to protect. The whole scheme depends on you believing you're lucky to have someone paying attention." Lucky to have someone paying attention. I drove home and sat in Arthur's chair, and I let myself feel every part of that sentence. Then I called my daughter and told her to come over for dinner. She brought wine. I made the chicken thing she's always liked. We sat at the table where she'd done her homework, and we talked about everything except Preston, and then eventually we talked about him too. Not with anger, but with something more like clarity. Turning a stone over to look at what's underneath it. Understanding the shape of the thing. Before she left, she hugged me for a long time at the door. "I'm sorry I didn't listen to my gut," she said into my shoulder. "Your gut was listening," I said. "You just had someone working very hard to drown it out." I still live in this house, my house, the one with the garden and the back porch and the lilac along the fence. I still sleep in the same bed Arthur and I shared for 3 decades, and in the mornings I make coffee and stand at the kitchen window and watch the yard come into the light. No one is taking it from me, not now, not ever. And if you are sitting in a restaurant somewhere reading this and something has felt just slightly off for just slightly too long, I need you to listen to that. That feeling is not hysteria. That feeling is not you being difficult or ungrateful or too suspicious for your own good. That feeling is information. It has always been information. The only question is whether you act on it before someone spends 11 months teaching you not to. I still think about that folded $20 bill, how small it was, how much it weighed. Dorothy didn't know me. She had no reason to say anything. She could have finished her iced tea and driven home and told herself it wasn't her business. Most people do. Most people have learned through a long accumulation of small discouragements that stepping into a stranger's life uninvited tends to go badly. So they look away. They stir their drinks. They let the moment pass. She didn't, and because she didn't, I still have my house. Melissa still has a future that belongs to her. Rosalind's story, which might have been buried in a county file forever, ended up in front of a prosecutor. There's a thread between all of those things, and it starts with one woman deciding that doing the right thing mattered more than being comfortable. I've been thinking about what it actually takes to do what Dorothy did. It's not complicated, but it's not easy either. It requires a certain kind of honesty, the kind that makes you look at a situation clearly and call it what it is, even when everyone around you is pretending not to notice. Preston was counting on people not looking too closely. He was counting on the veneer of pleasantness being enough. Most of the time, for most people, it is. Honesty of that kind, the kind that doesn't flinch, is rarer than we like to think. And then there's what Melissa had to do once she finally saw it. She had to sit with information that dismantled 11 months of her life and decide what to do with it anyway. That's not a small thing. It would have been so much easier to explain it away, to believe the story she'd been given, rebuilding your understanding of something you loved and doing it clearly without bitterness eating you alive. That takes a kind of intelligence that has nothing to do with book learning. It's the intelligence of being willing to be wrong and then doing the harder work of figuring out what's actually true. What I keep coming back to, though, is the staying power it takes, the long part. Melissa filing the papers, sitting through the depositions, going back to work on a Tuesday morning when everything still felt raw, Rosalind in her son's spare room, agreeing to testify via video call for a woman she'd never met, about things she probably would have preferred never to speak of again. That kind of endurance doesn't announce itself. It doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It's just one foot in front of the other for as long as it takes until the thing is done. Preston had calculated that none of us had enough of any of those things, that I was too old and too lonely to question a reasonable-sounding number, that Melissa was too in love to look carefully, that Rosalind was too defeated to fight again. He was wrong on all 3 counts, and that wrongness is what undid him. I planted lilac along the fence last spring, same as Arthur used to. Some mornings I stand at the kitchen window with my coffee, and I watch the light come through the yard, and I think, this is still mine, not because I was lucky, because enough people refused to look away. That's the only thing I know for certain. Looking away is always a choice. So is the opposite.